Ready, I call it to order. We have the this is a workshop meeting of February 15, 2023. I will call it to order. Have what in, and since it's a workshop, I don't remember that we need a roll call, but let's have a roll call anyway.
Councilmembers Grambling,
Here.
Kroger, here, Bacon, here, Schuyler,
Here.
Thomas,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here. Thanks, everybody. All right, so we've got a very short agenda. It might take some time, but we're here to discuss dedicated revenue sources to address housing challenges. And we have a sort of a staff report in the packet listing the purpose of the workshop, the background, lays out a number of options, and Preston, looks like you've got a PowerPoint ready to walk us through, so take it away.
Yeah, happy to do so. Before I just start talking for a few minutes, do you guys have any questions on anything? Is there, I mean, I don't want to just start talking at you guys. If there's right off the bat, specific items you guys would like to talk about.
Anybody have anything?
Let's
That's
see
all.
what you've got, and then we won't duplicate what you've presented.
Did everyone have a chance to read the very daunting packet?
It's lovely.
It's just like, okay, so I'm gonna put this relatively short let's go PowerPoint together. As you said, we're in a workshop, very informal type setting to discuss potential revenue sources for affordable housing. And ultimately, we'll be looking for direction from you all on how to proceed on that. This is what I would characterize a long-standing goal of the town council. It's identified in the master plan and have been in the strategic plan the last few years. Strategic plan is in part or largely guided by the master plan, but we had a conversation back in July that prompted the standalone workshop that you guys recall. So PowerPoint wasn't available on Dropbox. We were working on it today. So did everyone on Zoom see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll just run through these real quick. They mirror what was in the staff report. Some potential revenue sources include sales tax, which would be an additional assessment on taxable goods. It would provide a broad base for revenue generation that would require voter approval to initiate. Any tax would. Sales tax would be more likely to burden lower income households and other some of the other options. You also have property tax. In addition, it would occur by way of an additional mill levy dedicated to affordable housing. And in the same way, sales tax, property tax mill would provide a broad base for revenue generation. Real estate transfer tax is a really interesting one, but not really an option. But it's just it's good for the sake of conversation and for the sake of information. It'd be an assessment on the sale of a home, a real estate transaction, if you will. Several, I don't know if I should use the word several. I think there's a number, I don't remember off the top of my head how many, but a number of communities that were grandfathered in with their existing real estate transfer taxes, meaning those rents were imposed and in place prior to Tabor being enacted, which would have been what, 1992 or something like that. Am I making that up? I think it was early 90s.
More recent than 92, but I don't remember what it was.
So new real estate transfer taxes in the state is prevented at this point. Some other revenue sources, impact fees, those would be assessments on new commercial and residential development to produce affordable housing. Fees are calibrated to offset the impact of the new development, housing availability and affordability by providing funding for new affordable housing developments. Similar to other impact fees, these fees, linkage fees is another coined phrase for it, require a nexus study to set fee amounts. Inclusionary zoning fees in lieu. Inclusionary zoning or housing ordinances would be requirements to include income restricted housing in new developments. We don't currently have in place inclusionary zoning regulations or requirements. That's hopefully on the docket sometime soon, but we don't have that formality in place. They allow developers to pay a fee in lieu of construction of the required affordable or income restricted units, and fee revenues are typically dedicated to an affordable housing trust fund. It's a model out there. And then the last two, which we've talked about, the lodging tax, of course, that was kind of the center of the conversation back in July. You recall the chamber was in here, and the initial conversation was about modifying how the lodging tax proceeds are earmarked. Might talk about that here in a minute, but recent legislation gives communities more flexibility in how lodging tax revenue is spent, making this a more viable option for funding for affordable housing challenges. And the option capitalizes on tourism to help fund local housing. And then you have short-term rental taxes, be it a tax imposed on short-term rentals. And in the same way, I just characterized it with lodging tax, the revenue source would capitalize on tourism to help fund local housing. Went into that in a little more detail in the memo, as staff is recommending that that council consider a short-term rental tax. Pam and I thought it'd be good to spend some time going over the tax rates or tax rates that we currently have in effect. We have a what I would call a very standard property tax, a property tax mill levy of 8.651 mils currently. You guys should recall that, not too far removed from the budget cycle. Revenues are for general operating purposes. For fiscal year 2023, revenue is pretty darn closely projected at $346,695 based on total taxable assessed valuation of properties within Ridgway. There's also a standalone rent bond property tax, which I for a while have had a difficult time wrapping my head around because it gets so convoluted. But it was 2014 voters approved this property tax that varies year to year. It's the greater of $50,000 or 1/2 of the capital improvement sales tax revenues generated in the calendar year preceding the year in which bond debt service is due. So we talk about that every budget cycle, but we do have that in place. Sales tax, right now the sales tax percentage is 3.6%. It's imposed on all sales of commodities or services identified in the Ridgway Municipal Code. Revenues projected at just north of 1.3 million in this calendar year, and largely for general operating purposes. A couple caveats to that: voters did approve, I forgot to put the year in, I don't remember the year, but approved designating revenue from food for home consumption to be expended specifically for parks purposes. I think it is, right, Pam?
Yes.
What year would that have been?
Well, it was reallocated at the end of the 90s. I don't remember, 98.
And then in 2005, voters approved a 0.6% sales tax increase, taking it from 3% to 3.6%, funds of which of that 0.6% are allocated to the acquisition and construction of capital improvements and equipment. Voters also approved allocating that capital improvement sales tax revenue for repayment of the RAMP bond. Rounding it out, you got your lodging tax, we just talked about it a little bit, but more specifically, it's currently 3.5% per room per night on the business of furnishing rooms or accommodations in a hotel, motel, etc. Revenues projected at $100,000 this year, and up to 70% of those proceeds of the lodging tax must be used for tourism promotion and economic development. And we currently have a contract. The town has a contract in place with the chamber and has had that in place for a while to spearhead those to spearhead all of that on behalf of the town. The remaining 30% goes towards expenses attributable to tourism and growth. And then the last one, the excise development tax. Beth knows this one well. An excise tax is levied upon the privilege and business of creating subdivisions for residential development. The amount of the tax equals $1,500 times the maximum number of dwelling units allowable on each lot or parcel created by the subdivision. And I feel like in recent years, there's been a little bit of misunderstanding based on how that reads, a little bit of ambiguity, but
It's not ambiguous. I read it and I wrote a check for $3,000.
we did question about it. No question.
Because there was a parcel existing, and like
Right.
it's wishful reading.
Just north of $28,000 the revenue projected in 23, which is at this point probably way too conservative, but you know, hindsight, right? And that goes to general fund for general operating expenditures. So I talked a lot really fast, just wanted to give you kind of a overview, a very broad overview of our tax portfolio. Did I leave anything out, Pam?
No, sounds good. Got it.
The last slide, sorry for the death by PowerPoint, but this is straight out of the memo, but staff is recommending based on, you know, conferring and some research that council can short-term rental tax dedicated towards affordable housing. If it were to be enacted and approved by the voters, short-term rentals, licensed short-term rentals, there's not any out there that don't have a license, would be subject to the short-term rental tax as well as the existing lodging tax. If you were all to agree with that route, of course, this would be a lot larger conversation. And this would go with any tax option you all would look to pursue. Staff would need to get a better understanding of revenue impact and those financial implications by looking into I put 2022 reported revenues, but even before that, probably to determine what a tax at specific rates would be estimated to generate. We did a preliminary exercise last week. 2% between a 2% and an 8% short-term rental tax would generate somewhere between $15,000 and $60,000 annually. And so again, I'll turn it over to you here in a second, but we're looking forward to the conversation here and ultimately looking for direction from you all as it relates to whether or not to do anything at all or pursue a tax option so that staff can have the amount of time needed to prepare ballot language for you all to consider at a future meeting, and then again better understand revenue impacts so that we can be compliant with the necessary Tabor ballot language requirements.
Was there a reason a pure vacant home tax wasn't considered? Whereas a short-term rental would impact somebody who is a local resident, who lives in the community full-time, wants to rent their house to take advantage of the fact that they live in Ridgway, but they are a productive member of that community and that neighborhood. And then it would also capture funds from people who maybe have just purchased a house and aren't even interested in short-term renting it. Or their short-term, and we would still catch I would love to see it be like a 6-month occupation, and that could be filled by a long-term renter, a 6-month renter, actually occupying the home yourself. And if you're making a business with the short-term rental, then you would also pay said tax if that's what it's being used for. I know it's been considered, I know Crested Butte, it was voted down, but I know other places have considered that. I don't know how it would be administered, but.
What's the town west of Grand Junction?
Really?
Fruit, I think, passed something, and I definitely think we should explore what I would call a speculative real estate tax. Which is what you're talking about, buying property and basically just speculating on it, not buying it for yourself or to rent full time and just sitting on it or short-term renting it, whatever the case. It's more complicated, probably more difficult to try and accomplish, but it's worth looking at what Fruit did, I think.
I just think when I think back to URA passing their short-term rental tax, there were a lot of people who were upset because they were using their short-term rental to help defray their costs as a local to live here. And I think most of us recognize, and Preston acknowledged this in his memo, that bringing people into the community and having visitors is a net positive. Where the downside happens is when you have that like house in the neighborhood that isn't actually part of the neighborhood because it's a rotating door of people. But if I rented my house for 2 weeks because I was gone over Christmas and there was an issue, Preston's gonna go, Beth, what happened? Like there is a human who lives in that house who is the contact. And then I'm the local who was just trying to like do my thing. I paid my short-term rental license fee, you know, I pay those taxes, but I got to offer a good rate to help me continue to live here.
I see this as a yes and situation. I am firmly in support of a short-term rental tax. And I do think maybe a second homeowner situation in which the homeowner is not here half the year, or a lodging tax increase. So I think we can increase those revenues in multiple ways to give ourselves a bigger pot to make more affordable housing for more people, or maybe both affordable and attainable housing. Yeah.
Can I step back for a minute? There's been a lot of discussion here and some interesting options on how to raise money, but very little discussion on how we would use the money. Is the, you know, the order of magnitude of somewhere between 15 and 60,000, is that going to make an appreciable difference in our ability to support affordable housing? In other words, do we have a dedicated do we have a dedicated use for, or an understanding of what the value of raising this money is to the community?
I think it's obvious, Terry, that, you know, we need as much money as we can possibly raise to help with affordable housing efforts across the board. And no, we don't know what exactly those are going to be. They're still happening, and the more money we can raise, the better. So, I mean, and the numbers that staff's thrown out are based on projections for this year. Those numbers are going to go up over time, most likely, unless, you know, we get a huge recession or something. They're probably going to fluctuate. So, I mean, I understand your question, but I think it's premature to debate what we're going to do with the money, when the reason we're sitting here is because we've been talking for months about how important affordable housing is, and how many different projects there are happening just right now, and how we need to be able to find some money to continue to be able to support these efforts, whether it be in back fees or waiving building permit fees, whatever it is. We need to be able to offset that. And I don't think there's any doubt up here that we need to find as much money as we possibly can to do this. So
Is this order of magnitude of money effective enough to
well, that's why we're talking about it.
Right.
I mean,
Well, I
this
mean, I
is
would-
just a starting.
I would love to have double that, but can we do that without, you know, and I hesitate when we say we need as much money as we need, or as we can, because the flip side of this, and I appreciate Preston calling out that a sales tax has impacts on those who are just barely making it in the community, right? That's why I would like us to look at something in addition to just a short-term rental tax, where people are using that to be in their homes that they have. I think we are really lucky to have some organizations working in our community. We've worked with Habitat. The Home Trust is doing great work, and I would hope it is the goal of this community, and I have found it to be the goal of this council, that we want to help facilitate those things in any way we can. We also, though, can't just waive tap fees forever, because we know
we don't have that money.
well, and
We
then
need that income.
and we've run into it with water rates, right? Where we realized we were asking water users to subsidize. We had an imbalance between residences and commercial properties. We can't then ask our water users to be perpetually subsidizing tap fees for affordable housing. We need to find ways to cover that and be transparent about where that money is.
Well, the other idea I like that Preston's got listed and I had listed on my list as well is the in lieu fees. deed restrictions aren't working for us. When we have $500,000 deed restrictions, that kind of defeats the purpose of affordable housing, as I think the original intent was. And so if we, instead of doing that, if we have the developers provide an in lieu, and you know, if it's $500,000, it's $500,000, gives $500,000. That will add up pretty quickly, Terry.
So you're saying you either find a way to build us a unit that's actually affordable, or
give
you
us
write us a
money.
really big check.
Yeah, why not?
And I think,
My only caveat to that is in today's market with materials costing what it costs. Because I still feel a little guilty for the developer that I was like, how much is your affordable housing gonna be? But I think the point it needed to be made that like you're exactly what you're saying, a $500,000 deed restricted unit
It's pointless.
it does not help.
It doesn't work for the intent.
well,
Well, I'm not gonna say I won't say pointless, but I'm gonna say like,
exactly pointless, but it's questionable.
right, and so I think. My only concern is that developers are gonna look at us and be like, so basically you're charging me a fee because with materials costs and infrastructure costs.
Having them give us a deed restricted house is essentially the same thing, right? We're just saying, you don't have to build that house, just give us some.
Well, and if it helps, Terry, I think what we're talking about right now just goes to show that the staff's recommending the short-term rental tax. That's just one piece of the puzzle. I think we're all talking and thinking about as many different pieces of the puzzle as we can.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was even gonna go back and say, you know, the real estate transfer tax. Yes, that was outlawed by Tabor, but there's been discussions on and off in the last at least 5 years at the state level of going to the voters statewide and saying, please allow us to reinstitute RETTs only on the basis of having them work for affordable housing, having the money go strictly to affordable housing and require a local vote of the ballot question in order to put that in place in any community, any county, any municipality.
Is that
And there has been interest in pursuing that. It's, you know, it'd be an uphill battle, there's no doubt. But I mean, I think everybody, I mean, you look at what's going on with the state right now, just in terms of conversations about affordable housing, it's really become almost overblown, but in a real way, it's not overblown because the whole idea of market rate affordable is out the window. It doesn't exist unless you live in some place like Julesburg or something, you know. No offense to people of Julesburg. Julesburg's a lovely town. But you know, any place that's desirable, market rate affordable doesn't exist. It's just gone. So
Is the real estate transfer tax paid by the seller?
That's a
good question.
Because if it's paid by the buyer, that also compounds the problem.
Right.
I think it's the bot or.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
There's time.
I think it's good.
Negotiated, but.
it would make sense to be the seller because the seller is the beneficiary of the appreciation of being in a
Yeah,
desirable
I think
house.
it's so, but I honestly, I don't know.
It's the buyer.
That's dumb. I don't like it. Because if you have a family who is striving, is making something in the bottom of our market fit into their budget to buy something. If you put a transfer tax on and they're paying a premium, that's
Terry,
counterproductive.
That was JT.
JT.
Yeah, it's typically 7% of the cost. And the onus is on the buyer.
Really? Yeah.
Andrea's had her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I haven't been watching the hands up. Andrea, go ahead.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt you guys. You guys keep on chatting. I just wanted to throw in a couple pieces of information.
We'd love to hear your input.
So I wanted to respond to a few things. Terry was asking what, how much do we need to come up with? And I can't really give a good exact answer on that, but what this fund could be used for could be a number of things, like Beth mentioned, tap fees, covering building permit fees, like we come to you guys for operating support. Land, if you had the opportunity to purchase a piece of land, I just want to let you guys know that Andrew Bosnecker, I think he's a representative, he might be a senator, I think he's a representative. He is working on a bill that would allow local governments to have the first right of refusal on certain properties. And so that they could match, that they could have the option of matching a purchase price. And so it could open up some opportunities for local governments to purchase land. So I just wanted to throw out just some ideas of what the fund could be used for. And then I wanted to just speak to the fee in lieu. It's an interesting concept, and something to think about is I have talked with a couple of developers, and they had mentioned that they would prefer a fee in lieu instead of having to do deed restricted units, because as you guys are coming up against, in order for their projects that are market rate that have no subsidies to pencil out, they have to have those deed restricted units at really high AMIs, which end up not really being all that affordable. They would much rather, and here's something just to know, which, you know, is we're not trying to necessarily, you know, help developers just in general do well financially, but if they could donate money to a nonprofit, they prefer that, and you know, they can basically write that off. So if the Home Trust, if you guys had an interest in this, you know, we could potentially hold the fee in lieu. It would make it more enticing, I guess, to have a developer pay the fee in lieu to a nonprofit. So it's just to throw that out there. And then the third thing and the last thing I just wanted to mention, like in terms of the demand for affordable housing, to make you guys aware, Region 10 is finishing up a 4-county housing study that includes Ridgway County. And they have come to the conclusion that Ridgway County will need a minimum of 270 housing units, which includes rentals and home ownership, over the next 10 years, or basically 13 units every year for the next decade. And that's a conservative estimate. This is based on job growth projections and unfilled jobs in Ridgway County only. It does not include retirees or account for commuting. And then almost 50% of that number needs to be below market. And that would be below 80% AMI. But over the 4-county region, they are talking 5,000 units of housing need to be built over the next decade. So I think there's definitely going to be a need there. Like you said, John, recession might change things, but again, I don't have a crystal ball, but it does seem like for the next decade, we're definitely going to be building some affordable housing.
Thanks, Andrea. And yeah, I'm on the Region 10 board. I think I shared the draft PowerPoint that they presented, that group had presented to the board on their needs assessment. Did I share that with all you guys? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we've seen that. It is kind of daunting, but it's not surprising either. So, I mean, I guess.
Mayor, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So thanks, Andrea. That's really helpful, especially coming from the Home Trust perspective. Revenue for affordable housing can be deployed in dozens and dozens of ways. Andrea just listed some really great options, but I just wrote down a few more, so please indulge me. land banking, purchasing units to make available to staff or other members of the community, instituting a deed restricted purchasing program, underwriting affordable housing developments, which we're starting to see around here, contributions, just like contributions to the home trust for operating expenses, underwriting tap fees, and building permit and plan check fees, funding nexus studies, which I mentioned during the PowerPoint, funding needs assessments, stuff like that. So
Grant matches.
grant matches. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of ways to deploy this funding, but what's needed, and this is a good starting point, but what's ultimately going to be needed is a plan, like a plan for how to use these funds, criteria for deployment. I'm just thinking out loud, but there's some communities that have that in place. City of Grand Junction comes to mind. They have a really good, I don't know what they call it, but like a plan, if you will. And that would be one of the next steps, is to figure out how to deploy the funds. So again, it's helpful to hear from Andrew and the Home Trust perspective, but yeah, there's a lot of ways to deploy it.
Kristen, thanks for that. And just going back to my comment, which sounded kind of naive. Samuel Power recently granted the Home Trust $15,000 as part of our Sharing Success grant. And Andrea and her associates received that grant. And at the time, she was presenting the project that was the target of the grant. And I think the project was in the and I can't remember the exact term, maybe Andrea can bring that forward, but it was several $1 million, and we gave her $15,000. And at the time, although it felt good to give that grant, it just seemed like such a drop in the bucket in terms of what was needed to support that project. Likewise, today I found out that we're providing the Space to Create project $116,000 in rebates for the use of the appliances and going all electric and so forth. And it just seems in scale, it seems that, what we're looking at raising pales in comparison to some of the money that's needed out there. And so that was the nature of my question, which is we're debating, it almost seems like we're debating nipping at the fringes here, as opposed to having some meaningful money raised. Granted, I don't know how else to raise more, and to Beth's point, and it'd be great if we could double or triple or quadruple it, but it's the scale of attacking the problem that seems daunting to me.
Well, and I guess all I was trying to say, Terry, is that, you got to start somewhere. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, every dollar counts.
to allow yourself to be daunted to the point where you don't take action, and that's way worse. So
Well, and I wasn't suggesting that, certainly, but
no, I understand.
yeah.
Is there a,
Jake has a comment. Go ahead.
You're in the time for public comment.
It's a workshop.
it's a workshop.
I had a Jake Neese, Erie County Commissioner, and on the board of the Home Trust as well. Just some comments on some of the discussion I already heard, and some general comments that municipalities have some extra tools that the county doesn't have or aren't really as effective. For instance, the lodging tax. The county could implement a lodging tax, but we'd hit a handful of bed and breakfast with that, so it wouldn't be particularly effective. I would really support the short-term rental excise tax and or a lodging tax. But on that short-term rental excise tax, I still think it's my request that the town would consider enforcement for short-term rentals, because currently we have a system, and the county and city had a system before where we were encouraging folks to inform on their neighbors if they were running illegal short-term rentals. And I don't really like creating that kind of culture. And I think if we're passing rules, we should have a way to enforce them. So I would continue to encourage the town to consider an enforcement mechanism for those short rentals. I wanted to also note, have you follow along with Proposition 123. That was a ballot measure that passed this last fall, and it's another grant program. So it wouldn't be continuing funding, but that's going to be something that'll be a state continuing funding source. And that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, but it is going to require local governments to develop a fast track process for affordable housing. So I think that's something that I'm watching as they're starting to flesh that out from the ballot measure to actual law, that I encourage you all to watch as well. On the real estate transfer tax, Pitkin County, that's Aspen, is actually working with CCI, surprisingly enough, to come up with a Tabor challenge, where they aren't going to be trying to overturn Tabor or anything, but try and find a path for those real estate transfer taxes. And I think anything new that comes up is going to look different from those real estate transfer taxes that were grandfathered in the past. For instance, something that I know I'll be advocating for is only looking at those real estate transfer taxes for transfers over a certain amount. Because we don't want to be charging those for someone who's buying their first house at $200,000. We're looking at houses in Aspen that are changing hands every other year for $20 million. And we've got less of that, but that's something that is in the works. So that'll probably be a decade-long fight, but it's out there. Let's see. Another idea to look at would be subdivision, increasing subdivision or PUD fees. If there's a developer that buys up a tract and splits it up, and maybe that's something that the town is already looking at in the moratorium. I don't know, but that's something that's been kicked around on the county level. Higher fees on subdividing land is another idea to consider for long-term funding. And then I think you covered some of the use of funds, what Preston just listed off about backfilling in-kind contributions like tap fees. So there's a lot of good uses. And if you have that fund that's already existing, then it's easier to bring in other sources. So I'm a big proponent, even if we're only bringing in $15,000 to $50,000. It's a great start.
And you may know more about this. I was just going to ask, sounds like Aspen's working with CCI. Are there any groups of mountain towns? It's similar to the way that CC4CA is advocating for change at the state level for climate issues, approaching the real estate transfer tax. Are there any banding together of these small communities that could really rely on something like a real estate transfer tax? Because we have our voice, but we've seen that sharing and making it clear the impact it could have statewide for multiple communities is powerful.
So I think CCAT might be that organization. That's another mostly county level organization that's kind of parallel to CCI, but is more progressive. CCI is kind of like the United States Senate because each county in the state gets one vote. And so just think about how that plays out. So it does lean more conservative. So it was actually really surprising to see CCI accept that discussion, but really Pitkin County is taking the lead on that. And there's no legislation yet. They're working on it. So it's going to be a long fight on that one. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Jake.
Can I jump in a quick question?
Yeah.
Going to the recommendations by staff. Why was the margin of 2% to 8% on the short-term rental tax recommended? Where did that huge range come from? Other than the comps that are out there in other towns, why was that range specified and not anything higher?
So nothing was recommended. We just we needed to have a starting point. The whole point of the staff report was just so that there's a starting point for the conversation. But 2% and 8%, somewhat arbitrary based on, as you said, looking at some of the other communities, could have gone higher, but I ran out of time. So I did the math. Pam, Jess, and I should just give Jess all the credit because we were having trouble doing simple math. It stopped after 8%. So yeah, somewhat arbitrary, JT, but yeah, I mean, that was preliminary. And if there's a desire to look at higher percentages, totally understand, and we can certainly do that.
Gotcha. I just wanted to get a sense of that as we're trying to zero in on which options and which hybrid options are priorities. And like, for instance, I would definitely support keeping that high in the priority as a mechanism, among other mechanisms. But I would also want to consider how to balance that range, or what the final percentage that we'd identify as an option as we figure out whatever a hybrid way of combining some mechanisms to achieve, to Terry's point, an effective amount of money. Not just a starting point and getting going, but hoping that we can approach this pretty ambitiously.
Absolutely.
Well, and I was struck by URA's being far and away the highest in the state that was at least on your list. You know, I would, if we're ready to start talking numbers, I would certainly support the higher end of the range that staff recommended. And I would be interested in possibly going higher to 8 or 10.
Especially if there's local precedent like that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, people are obviously coming to URA and staying in URA, like, could we do 12% or something along those lines, just to be like slightly less, but.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna go 12, I would almost say let's go 15 as a nod to our neighbors that we're not trying to undercut them by 3%.
Probably smarter and more community oriented.
I don't know, Preston, I know we have a cap on our short-term rental licenses. How many of those short-term rentals are associated with owner-occupied homes?
Ooh.
Which is, those are the people that I worry for,
Right.
right? Like, those are the people who are going to have to raise their rates. They've got some income stream that's helping them live in our community. So not saying I won't go for a 15%. I just want to like, think about that impact.
Well, typically, isn't that passed on?
Yeah, but it results in a
People
higher.
have to rent
That
their-
makes sense.
Yeah.
their rent.
Hey, I don't, do you know?
I don't exactly, but I would guess half and half.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Maybe even leaning more towards the local and being less than the people who bought and are living.
Which takes me back to a vacant home tax. Like, just, I know there are people who are in our community who right now no one can buy in, and that's the problem. But we have people who were able to buy in the last 7 to 10 years, whatever, and they're doing the things they need to do to be here. And I don't have a ton of extra, and I know there's going to be concern. There was definitely concern in URA for that exact reason.
So I'll just jump in real quick. We can find that out. We currently have 49 active short-term rental licenses. So we're almost at the cap. We can talk with Karen and figure what that percentage really is, maybe next time, whatever. Question to you. I don't know a whole lot about, I know how they work. Don't know a whole lot about how the vacant homeowner, second homeowner tax works.
They're
in other
usually,
communities.
well, the mostly bigger towns. I did not know that Fruta had done one.
Or how did you characterize Frutas? It's speculative.
The way I've heard it referred to as a, speculative real estate tax. The tax on speculative real estate purchases, in other words, purchase that isn't, you're not buying to live in it, you're buying it to make money on.
Yeah, my question, my head just straight off goes to how
That-
you would administer that, and
Right, how would you
Totally.
know?
but I mean, we would talk to Fruta and some of these other probably larger cities that have them in place. I wonder if there's any other cities and towns in Colorado that have second homeowner.
It's worth talking to some people. I believe it was Patrick Ryan and Elliot Dola who told me about Frutas.
Crested Butte tried to pass one, so they may have some of the language around what they were going to do. I mean, this is gonna sound really like political, but if we're going to the voters and we're asking for the voters to approve a thing, if you are registered in Uray County and you live here, you're not paying that vacant home tax. Right? Like that is a tax that by and large, the voters of Ridgway don't pay.
Tax is kind of a dirty word to also be lightly political. Sorry, I think I may have just found the actual wording of the ordinance for Fruta. Not 100% sure if I'm hearing that out, but tax is always kind of a dirty word, no matter which way you cut it. But I totally hear you, what you have to say about it. Like, I'm very much into the word of a vacant home tax, because I do think that if people are not going to be part of our community, maybe they should pay a little bit.
Pay like enough that it hurts a little bit.
Have a house here.
And if, well, because it has to be enough that it hurts a little bit, because what we actually would like is there is already a house there. There is already a tap there. There is already a CO. Like, you know, what we would actually really like is for them to be like, dang, I want to retire there in 10 years, but it would be better for me to put someone in that house and I'll get a hotel room down at the lodge when I come.
For the 3 weeks that I'm here. Or
3
for the
days, half the
3 days
time.
here.
You have a pulse on homes.
Well, I just pulled up the lovely article in the Plain Dealer about vacancies in Uray County. And at the time they were saying, based on census data, that we had 89 vacant units in Uray. And I assume that includes a short-term rental, but 90 homes, like, can we get 20% of those, like, as places for people to live now? They're built.
In the 13 units per year Jake was talking about. In the Region 10 study.
There's 600 of those in the county.
JT, did you want to say something?
No, finish your thought to Beth right there.
Oh,
And then I'll.
that's my
come back.
thought. My thought is there are homes that are already built that no one's living in, and I want to figure out how we can capitalize on them. And if you don't want to let somebody live in it, then pay us money.
Yeah, Beth, I think you can capitalize on it, but you can't begin to expect that some of those people would want those homes occupied. But the point that I was going to bring up is that, for instance, when you have an undeveloped piece of land, right, you pay more taxes. And then when you build, then of course your taxes come down a bit, aside from all the other fees that you have associated with it. So somewhere in that margin, in that range, once you have a certificate of occupancy, maybe if you have a certain number of days vacant, then we can figure out a schedule that could be proposed concurrent, with a fee associated with it, a tax, whatever, but also concurrent, investigate a way to incentivize those people who are absentee owners and remind them that when they do come here for whether it's 2 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 months, that the amenities that they want provided are provided in a service industry for which we should remind them that in their absence, they could help support those people in some shape or form. And so that could be something that's not necessarily a tax, but even a fund that could be paid into.
We are in a little bit of an uphill push though, because I approached somebody who was adding short-term rental one time and said, why didn't they just long-term rent it? And their answer was, well, they can't cover their mortgage. There's no way there's enough people in it that they're covering their mortgage. The fact is that the rate you can charge for a short-term rental is much more attractive. And so,
for sure.
That's so interesting though, because what we were hearing when we were doing our short-term rental licensing discussion and implementing that, we heard from so many people that said they don't rent their unit enough. They were arguing that they don't make a huge killing on the short term.
yeah, I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like it's that lucrative versus having somebody who writes you a check every month.
Right.
I don't understand it.
So
It can be though. I mean, it really depends. There's all sorts of recipes for it. Like I have a short-term rental license. I rented this past year quite a bit. I held it also in July for musicians and everybody else so that I could some way balance out the income that I had coming in. But I also had a rental management company that kept 30%. Granted, they did a lot of work for me and I wasn't doing the one flipping the beds and the sheets and everything when somebody else came in. And I could have maximized my revenue more, as many people do when they're doing the hard labor of flipping it, so to speak. So it can be incredibly lucrative for somebody locally. And I think all of us know off the top of our heads, there are certain people in town that run full-time businesses and simultaneously rent their houses and live in their vans or go out to Ridgway State Park so that they can make their nut on their mortgage. So, I mean, there's 10 scenarios of how people are gleaning income from this.
But the situation you just described in my vacant home taxes, that is that person's primary residence.
Yeah,
Which is why I just keep mentioning that, because a short-term rental tax could impact somebody like that trying to do their thing.
gotcha.
So-
And just shining a light on the fact that it's not just a simple formula, that there's a diversity of ways that it's done. And I certainly hear you, Beth. There are people that the amount of times when they do have that 1 week where they rent it and go sleep or camp or go to the desert or whatever else, are totally hanging their livelihood on that week of income so that they can make the nut on their mortgage. And so we don't want them to take the hit. But I agree with you. So the more vacant, the longer term vacant houses are the ones that seem to be the necessary targets to be taxed accordingly. But I want to do it in a way that's not just a penalty, but more on the incentive side.
So I just want to chime in. Is there collective interest for staff to research vacant second homeowner taxes in other communities and bring it back to a subsequent work session, what have you? Another question I have, I think it'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. If we're looking for a solid, steady funding stream for affordable housing, and again, I need to better understand vacant homeowner tax. It seems as though you could get to a point where if you have this tax in place, vacant homes might dwindle or maybe go away. You get a huge sense of community with folks bought into the community not having to pay that tax. And then you don't have a funding stream.
That's just, that gets back to my point of we need multiple pieces of the puzzle. If that happens, that'd be terrific.
Oh yeah, that's pie in the sky, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to.
Yes.
Our short-term rentals currently do at least pay the lodging tax, right? Because they're lodging?
Correct.
Okay, just making sure. So I don't know, does it make sense versus levying a 15% short-term lodging tax that focuses only on the short-term rentals? We had our chamber rep in here saying, and people who work in hotels, should we be looking at raising the lodging tax to 5%? Because that hits both the short-term rentals without causing extra pain in a short-term rental market, and also bumps up that pot of money.
I believe we just had the discussion that our lodging tax is relatively low compared to those.
Yes, thank you. That was the
Well,
discussion.
the chamber, in the paper that came out electronically half an hour ago, that they mentioned that the chamber's has been talking, though they haven't brought it up to us yet, about raising the lodging tax. Looking into raising the lodging tax, obviously it's not their decision. And I also want to say, I don't think we need to, if we go with a short-term rental tax, I don't think we have to make it 15 to be
No,
fair or array or something.
well, I just didn't want to go to 14 and be silly.
I would advocate, again, to try and balance the things that you're talking about in terms of the impact on the people who are just trying to survive here. I would say make it 10, don't go any higher than 10. So, I think there are a lot of different ways we can look at it.
I think a combination of a couple.
I was just gonna say though, if we bump the lodging tax up and they're already paying 5% on the lodging tax. If you have a 10% excise tax, you're at 15%.
Well, and my 10% number was.
I didn't know if you were I was actually
wasn't
trying to get.
accounting, I wasn't
Yeah.
accounting for a potential increase in the overall lodging tax. Because that's a whole other ballparks. We obviously have, we're juggling not just 3 balls here, we're juggling about half a dozen. But I have to say, I think I'm excited that we're having this conversation because it's the kind of thing that's going to make a real difference over time. And again, to Terry's initial question, it's, feels like a drop in the bucket, but the more we can do, the more different ways we can get creative with this, those drops become bigger and more of a stream. So
So do you mind if I rattle off?
Sure.
Some stuff?
what you're hearing.
Just what I'm hearing so far, and again, it's still early, guys, we can go on.
And Jake has a comment too, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry, did you go ahead?
Okay, this is about the how the short-term rental tax would affect owner-occupied units. I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, but I haven't gotten to have the conversation at the county level yet. Revising the county's short-term rental ordinance has been one of my priorities, but we've had other things that have come up. So I have a lot of notes on this, but I wanted to have the discussion or wanted to throw out for consideration having a different set of rules for owner-occupied rentals versus commercial short-term rentals, and having a stand. And again, this is food for thought, just an idea, but drawing that standard and saying, okay, so how do you define owner-occupied? I was thinking voter registration, driver's license, and your name on the mortgage, not XYZ Holdings LLC. And having those 3 things, I think, would be pretty ironclad to say that this is owner occupied. And actually, for owner occupied units, say there is no cap. If you are truly owner occupied, if we do meet that standard and we feel confident that you're living in that house, I'm okay with someone renting out a bedroom or their garage to continue to live here. I don't see why we would want to put a cap on that, because the intention of the cap, in my mind, is to curtail those spec houses that are used only for commercial short-term rentals.
And just to address that point quickly, if it didn't miss the ordinance, which I don't think it did, we did just that. We said that if you're renting a room in your house and you're living in the house, you don't count against the cap. We've already done that.
Okay.
So
It's not just a room. It's if I come get a permit and I want to go away for a month in the summertime, I
if
can
it's
rent.
your primary home.
Right.
I don't believe it counts.
You still
You need
get a
to
license,
need a license.
but
Yep.
it doesn't count against the cap.
And it's just, I think about how people could gain that, and it's about how do you prove that it really is your primary residence and you're not just walking into town hall and saying that. And then one other comment on the lodging tax is the lodging tax is also a potential revenue stream for childcare, which I think is the flip side of the coin, same coin of affordable housing. So consider the childcare that is hopefully coming soon with the Home Trust Sherman Street project as another potential outreached hand. And I know that the discussions around that, we've been talking about the lodging tax quite a bit. So just letting you know about that other conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
I like the idea of being able to define the short-term rentals and separate the owner-occupied units. And basically go after the business models of short-term rentals. Those are the ones that need to be hit.
So go ahead, Preston.
Yeah, so few things. Her direction to do research on vacant and or second homeowner taxes in other jurisdictions and how they work, how they're administered. Also, I think I heard, you gotta correct me if I'm barking up the wrong tree, but look at short-term rental tax revenue for the 10 to 15% range.
Now, do we want, I'm gonna ask again, do we want a total of 10 to 15%? Or are we talking a 10 to 15% short-term tax on top of?
I think
Lodging
further
tax.
discussion will follow.
Okay,
I do think that we should set our sights a little higher.
okay.
And we can be, you know, next time we come back, we can be very clear and depict exactly what that revenue would look like, coupled with, you know, lodging tax, if that's what you're getting at. Look at tax revenue with an increase to somewhere around 5%, maybe even further. Help me with that line of thinking, and modifying how the proceeds are earmarked. That would be an important element for that. So that's what I heard so far, and then
What about the in lieu payments? Did we?
oh, that's right. So should we hone in on that a little bit more? So,
I mean, could be a very nice big chunk of change.
so that's the fee. Well, not here, but would really want his guidance as it relates to how best to approach enacting a fee.
That's probably more long-term anyway, as opposed to immediate solution.
Yeah, somewhat, and it may couple well with the updates to chapter 7. Pam and I don't remember if we talked about this recently, but I think we will be due for updating our fee schedule coming in this upcoming budget cycle, and perhaps that might be a good time to look at enacting a fee in lieu in the way that Russ, you were talking about before. My mind, just to be helpful here, goes to not sure how solid or steady that funding stream would be, but certainly a funding source, absolutely. Developers aren't going to want to pay that if it's not going to help their development pencil out, you know what I mean? So you'd have to be thoughtful and strategic about what to say, right? There's models out there, absolutely.
Sure. And, you know, you're probably not gonna get that $500,000 from those guys, but still, I think there's better opportunity to get bigger chunks faster. And at the point where we've already approved most of the developments in town, well, this is nothing we can impose on anybody today. But there's still a horde of people that want to come in. And so it seems that the idea of adding developments here hasn't slowed down. And so I just see that as, and you know, it's not necessarily going to be a continuous thing, but when it's there, I mean, it's going to help. And you know, one of the other ideas I've seen in here is the idea of hitting the luxury tax. And so particularly in Ridgway, I don't know that we have that much in what would be deemed a luxury level. Probably a lot more in the county, but I mean, even with the 4 winds that's proposed out here, they're talking about 2,500 and 3,500 square foot houses. Those are pretty nice houses probably, so they may fall into that luxury tax idea. You know, and it's something just to kind of consider and kick around. It kind of goes.
Is that a tax in the game Monopoly? Just out of curiosity.
But the thing is, a luxury tax can be relative to properties in Ridgway. Like, you know, you're like, what is, you know, where does that line lie? I don't actually think it's that crazy, you know, because we draw the line, right? We don't have maybe $12 million properties like you might see if you're some fancy
we're not out
rich thing,
doing
but like,
it.
it's relative.
It is all relative and.
For a moment, addressing the use of proceeds from these taxes, is it my understanding that all of the money that we'd raise, regardless of the mechanism, is completely at the discretion of the current council? Or is there anything like the lodging tax, which has a dedicated 70% to a particular use, like the chamber? if we're going to propose a tax that goes onto a ballot measure, would it behoove us to have some percentage of it go to a particular dedicated fund, whether it be the Array Housing Trust or something that we identify that gives justification to it?
I thought the plan was to put it in the line item for affordable housing. Then whatever council at the time of budgeting can decide to allocate it to the land trust or to tap fees.
And that's exactly my point, is that makes this discretionary to the council that has been elected at that time. Is that what we're proposing, that it's totally, the whole fund is discretionary from the current
It's
council?
discretionary to that line item, and it is
Subject
on
to
the-
annual appropriation.
yes, subject to annual appropriations. The public sees the budget, like you can. I don't think it's.
If I can jump in.
Yeah.
Terry, I see what you're getting at. I think that's a good question. And I think we're getting into the realm, which is good. So the tangent of ballot initiatives 101 and the fundamentals, and trying to be thoughtful and strategic about how to word ballot questions so that, first of all, folks understand what they're voting on, providing for enough clarity on how the funds are going to be spent, but not I don't want to use the word burdening, but not getting too specific by saying, oh yeah, this money's going to go to, I don't know what you said, Terry, but like the home trust. I think you want to avoid that type of specificity so that there's still some discretion, as you were saying.
Well, some discretion. What if 50% of it were discretionary and the rest went to a dedicated use, separate from the line item of quote affordable housing, which is very generic. And the fact is, I don't have any suggestion as to what that would look like. I'm just wondering if that would help justify it on a ballot measure.
Yeah, well, Jane just suggested childcare. That's another,
Mhm.
that's another idea.
Again, it's a point well taken, Terry, but it's getting the cart before the horse. We need to decide the bigger questions of where we're going to try and find funding, and the details of that will determine whether, in order to say pass a ballot question, we would be wise to earmark those funds and not have them just dump into the general fund, which obviously I think everybody should agree with. So, your point's taken, but I think we need to figure out things in the right order. We can't make a decision on that now. I think if your question was, could we do that? I think there's probably unanimous agreement here that we need to make sure, just in terms of selling a potential ballot issue to the voters, that we earmark funds so that people aren't just accusing us of creating another, dirty word tax, and dumping that money into the general fund to do with as we please. That's not what we would do here. So.
Well, I mean, Preston rattled off a list of possible uses, and I think some of that language could make it to the ballot measure to at least show what the discretion is used for.
But I think this came up when we were discussing possibly changing the lodging tax before, and Bo pointed out, once you put some of those pieces of specific language in the ballot text, now you're wedded to that, and you do lose the ability, should some opportunity that we at this table sitting here right now haven't foreseen when it comes to state funding mechanisms or unique nonprofit ideas that come to us. I understand the idea of wanting to assure voters that their money is going to affordable housing. But I think part of that falls on this current council to be really transparent about how we use funds when it starts, and that is part of the public process mechanism, is that each council is accountable to our citizens who voted for a tax.
Yeah, and I mean, it's essentially been this council that actually started the affordable housing. We had a little bonus show up and we said, let's create that as affordable housing. Thus far, we've used it to take care of tap fees for Habitat for Humanity. We've given Wetterhorn that without using any of that money or very little of it. And so that seems to be this council's initiative on how to use it. So I agree that when we get to the ballot measure point, we need to have it nailed down, but I also want to see this with several different options on where that money comes from. So it may not all have to go for for ballot approval. I mean,
Yeah, no, I don't, I think some of it won't have to go to, sure.
I mean, in lieu, that's us and the developers, so. Which is one of the reasons I like it.
No, I think this is a great discussion, but the skeptic in me says, well, why are we working to raise money if we don't know what we're going to spend it on? But I think having this range of possible expenses like tap fees, like set aside for grant matching. In other words, identifying a number of discrete areas that we can project as, this is why we're looking to raise this tax for these kinds of expenses, even if there's not one that's an annual usage like the lodging, 70% of the lodging taxes for the chamber. But it's definitely something that has to be balanced with, why are you raising money if you don't know what you're going to spend it on?
I'm gonna say it again, this council has shown a desire, and I want our community to know that we are going to be aggressive with opportunities around affordable housing. And so I don't know, I feel like if I'm not on council in 5 years and I'm like, there seems to be the money in this line item just disappears. That's the accountability piece, like that's that continued public process piece. So we can list all of these ideas, but we list all the ideas and we leave one off and we've gone to the voters. We can't do that thing. Like,
Yeah, but if I can just jump in.
Yeah.
I think we're all on the same page. Terry, I think you're exactly right. That description, that narrative that we went over earlier, that can certainly help craft ballot language. But where it really needs to rest is in some sort of document or plan that I was talking about before that governs how the revenue or the revenue is deployed. But that's down the road. It's when we hopefully get to a point where you all have to help us craft a ballot question.
Right.
But I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, agreed.
I have a total tangent question. I don't know if you guys, how many of you guys know the history of that sales tax oddity where the ramp bit of the I'm getting tired. The property tax
Capital
piece,
improvement.
that we at the time the council was really concerned that the impact of that property tax was going to adversely affect residents. So that's where the greater of the two pieces came from. And as it worked out, the 0.6% capital improvements tax is always more than 50% or more than 50 grand. So pretty much, I mean, maybe the first year it wasn't, and I think it has been every year.
It has been the last few years, right, Dan?
Oh, more than that.
Yeah, it's, I literally, I think it goes back to the first year it wasn't, and every year since it.
Well, I mean, it was a minimal amount for a while, and then it's reached a point where
So
it's,
what's the sunset on that? Because there was a sunset on it.
when the bonds paid off,
And
2030 or something.
is it that far out?
yeah, it wasn't, well,
Okay, well, it's not a giant chunk of change, but I just want you to know that that's the history on that piece.
Well, it actually is a giant chunk of change because your bond payments
Yeah.
are 130,000, 150,000 a year. So that was the whole discussion that we had, was that we were losing our capital improvement
Right.
monies to purchase things, to start other capital improvement projects.
Right. I'd forgotten it was that much. Well, I just wanted everybody to know the history of that. And I also know that there is no prepayment penalty, so that at some point we can talk about trying to pay off principal.
didn't we talk about that? Was it this budget season or last budget season?
Yeah,
And Pam,
theoretically decide
you
that-
kind of said it wasn't.
Just to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sorry
We can
for
revisit it every year.
You try. All right, well, did you finish your summation?
Well, I have. Well, I added look more at the fee and lieu piece, which is great, and I kind of furthering my thinking, I think that fits under what we're doing with the chapter 7 update specific to the affordable housing section, which I have to check in with you, maybe holding off on that as part of the large majority of chapter 7, and maybe looking at that subsequent. I think it would fit well under when we take on those updates, but I'm thinking off the cuff. But regardless, we can look at that more, get some comparables, bring back more information.
Okay,
So I think I have some good direction to for staff to do some more research, put some information together, run some numbers, and come back to you all at a even your next meeting to further the conversation and see where that goes.
okay.
Does that sound cool?
Yeah,
Sounds good. Good.
Super cool.
it's in line with the ideas that I had when I walked in the door and kind of where this would go. So, yeah, I like it.
Okay. So is that enough for tonight, or do anybody have any?
Can I say one quick thing, John?
Sure.
I just want to say thank you to the town council. This is so exciting. I don't know, I just can't even tell you guys. This is so exciting that you guys are embarking on this, and I'm really excited to see where this all leads us. I think to good places, but so just thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. We know how hard so many of us are working on this issue, and you can tell that this council's commitment to trying to find solutions is huge. And this is just part of the process for sure. And it's probably going to be a number of meetings, a number of discussions before we get anything really concrete in place. But it's nice to know that we've got a lot of ideas, a lot of potential solutions, and we're heading in the right direction. So, and we couldn't do a lot of what we're doing without the support of the Home Trust and the mutual support that we give each other. So thank you for that. Anybody else, either on Zoom or here in the room, have anything else they want to add?
I wanted to step back on just one question. Preston hit it on earlier. I think John, you did too. What kind of support does DOLA provide us directly to shape these hybrid approaches to achieving things with affordable housing? Do they have can they provide a dedicated person that help us cull the research that's needed?
That's a really good question. And I don't know that I have a clear answer, and Preston might. I think the way I see DOLA's role is advisory, and that someone like Patrick Ronhalley, our regional rep, could point us in the direction of an entity or two that could give us some help with research. I'm thinking of like community builders out of Glenwood. That kind of entity is working on this stuff day and night, and would be a good resource. There may be some actual resources in DOLA that could help. Certainly the reason I brought up Patrick is that my recollection is that he's the one who told me about Fruita's effort. And that DOLA just is so great at seeing the opportunities, trying to help us get there with the opportunities, and it's always just a matter of having the discussion. So kind of a vague answer to your question, but I do think it's worth exploring.
I'll just piggyback on that. Patrick and others are great at advising. I think a really good resource would be the Community Development Office. Casey McPherson and Andy Hill come to mind. They may have already compiled some information that may help this initiative. So there's some routes for sure at DOLA that we can take. Patrick being, of course, our primary rep.
And Andy Hill, I know has definitely
But yeah, Andy,
said, give me a call anytime.
Yeah.
That could be some help.
Yeah.
been helpful with our 1271 grant, so may reach out to them.
I mean, I, the reason I asked is because I was just digging back into stuff I've saved. And there's the 2020 Affordable Housing Guide from DOLA, which is pretty comprehensive. You can even download the PDF. And coincidentally, the picture on the front of it is Ridgway. So like that breaks down all the barriers, that it breaks down all the legislative components of it. So I just figured that there would be somebody that could help us, hand in hand, figure out, the same stuff that staff has been working on, looking at the comps in other town and different mechanisms, and seeing what would fit under our, for the next stage of this conversation.
I have to comment, Liz is on the Zoom with us. And yet I'm looking at an article in the new Plains Dealer on page 2. It says Ridgway hunting for revenue for affordable housing, town considering short-term rental tax, chamber ponders lodging tax hike. And how did you write this ahead of the meeting, Liz? It's amazing.
She's sitting in the room too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see.
Very nice report.
Yeah, I'm impressed. It even goes through some of the issues we just brought up. It says, if town council agrees to pursue a short-term rental tax, Ridgway would follow in Uray's footsteps, where the city council asked voters in 2021 to approve a 50% excise tax on short-term rentals. And then it talks about how they're using that tax money. Specifically, that 50% of it goes towards the remainder is split between water and wastewater infrastructure projects. The other half is affordable housing. Pretty timely article.
Yeah, Liz was the one who actually pointed out that in the chamber's annual report, they mentioned wanting to explore upping the lodging tax. And I said, I didn't know it said that. So good on you to point that out. Off the record.
All right, so are we
Done for that.
are we done for tonight?
I'd say yes.
I think we are.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
You need anything else, Preston?
No, I think, yeah.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
On the
very much.
record, I
Thanks,
would like
guys.
to say I liked
Get
Stephen's
some rest,
vote
JT.
in last week's
Thanks, everybody.
town manager report.
Unless there's objection, I'll declare it's adjourned.
Okay, good night, everyone. Stay warm.
I offended him by saying.